Our agenda today, when we do introductions, we'll do a short overview of AM&T, and then we'll talk about the TAAC grant. When we'll talk about 4 steps in the grant to obtain approval, and then we'll have Q&A and wrap up at the end. Our presenters today are Teresa Stockton and Jeff Dubrava. Teresa is a client development specialist at TAAC. She has the responsibility for assisting people through this process, and she is responsible for the marketing of the program in New York, New Jersey, and Puerto Rico. Jeff Dubrava is our business developer at AM&T, and he's responsible for helping regional manufacturing organizations be more productive, profitable, and competitive. And with that, I will turn it over to Jeff. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Carol, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for taking time out of your busy days to join us for today's webinar. We really appreciate it. I'm going to give everybody an overview of AM&T, and if anybody's got any questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the Q&A at the bottom, and we will address them as they come up. But again, thanks for taking the time to join us. So AM&T is part of the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, also referred to frequently as MEP. The Manufacturing Extension Partnership is a national network of centers that is covered in all 50 states, including Puerto Rico. Each center is a partnership between the federal government and a variety of public and private entities. This includes state level, university, as well as not-for-profit organizations. And we all have the singular mission of trying to enhance the productivity and technological performance of manufacturers within the United States. So the National MEP System, again, as you heard me say, it's a very diverse network. We've got over 400 locations throughout the US. We've got manufacturing experts that serve as trusted business advisors and technical experts that are always ready and able to assist small to medium-sized companies within the United States as well as Puerto Rico. Talking about results and value as far as the MEP network goes, we aid in creating or retaining jobs, increasing and retaining sales, receiving investments, and billions of dollars in cost savings. AM&T is a not-for-profit, and we are part of 10 regional centers and 1 statewide center within New York State. We are funded by both the federal government as well as NYSTAR within New York State. AM&T is a private, not-for-profit organization. We were established in 1988. We have a team of professional consultants who deliver business solutions to small and mid-sized manufacturers within the southern tier of New York. We offer end-to-end services that help organizations plan, perform, profit, and grow. We also connect resources to local, regional, and national resources as needed. And we provide economic impact to the community in the southern tier for which we cover. So just again, wanted to give everybody a brief introduction to AM&T, give you a solid understanding of what we're all about. And now I'm going to turn everything over to Teresa Stockton. So thank you for your time.
Good morning, everybody. I appreciate everybody on the call today, and I'm sure a lot of you are getting tired of a lot of these webinars here at this point, but I know we all want some human interaction, but also I want to thank Carol and Jeff for putting this all together. I work very extensively with that MEP network that you see. We do cover a certain area, and but I do cover New York State, New Jersey, and Puerto Rico, as Carol had mentioned briefly. So I really try to develop strong relationships with my MEPs because they're the ones that get to know my manufacturers more on a local level, where we're more federal, so we cover larger areas. So anyways, we'll, let's see here. Talk a little bit about who we are, where we get our funds from, who I work for. I've been getting that question more and more, so I'll explain my role in this position. And as they had mentioned, if you do have any questions, I will take some breathers throughout, and we can, you know, ask some questions. So what our program is we're the trade adjustment assistance for manufacturers. It used to be specifically just for manufacturers, but about 20 years ago, when all of the call centers were leaving and different service organizations were leaving, or, you know, going outside of the country, we also included them as well. But the mission of our program is to help import-impacted U.S. manufacturers and service firms develop and implement projects to regain global competitiveness, expand markets, strengthen their operations, increase profitability, and to create jobs. So we're actually a Department of Commerce. That's where the actual funds come through, and then it's filtered through the Economic Development Administration. In my role, I actually work for the Research Foundation of SUNY, and we actually administer the grant program. So basically, I work for with the government, so you don't have to. That's how I try to look at my role. So what is this program? What is the TAAF program, and who's eligible? So what this is that it is specifically designed for manufacturing and service companies that have had losses in sales and employment due in part to foreign competition. So our magic numbers are 5%. So you have to have a decline in sales, and we look at total net domestic sales. So I'm finding that a lot of companies are having their export sales decrease, and we don't even look at your export sales. We are looking at just your domestic sales. And employment, a decline of both sales and employment of at least 5%. And part of that sales loss that you've had has to be due in part to import competition. So one of the examples I like to give is that if you're a manufacturer and you did, for example, $2 million last year, you did $1 million this year, you had 10 employees last year, you went down to 9 employees, you hit those 5% parameters in both sales and employee losses. Of your $1 million loss, only $50,000 or 5% has to be attributable to foreign competition. So our metrics, our numbers are extremely low. They're not huge numbers that have to be met. And we have many, many, many ways to be able to qualify you. So I know probably one of your questions is going to be, how do we prove foreign competition? So one of the things that we do is we actually will speak to couple of your clients with your permission. I do send you some questions that we would ask. They're 4 simple questions that take about 30 seconds. And very simply, the questions are you currently working with this manufacturer, and what are you purchasing from them? The second question is, have you gotten a quote for a like or similar product directly or indirectly outside of the United States? And they have to answer yes to that. The third question would be, has this caused you to lessen your purchases to this company? They have to answer yes to that. And the fourth and final question is, what is the country of origin? So when we get to that point, I do give you the questions. I ask that you speak to your clients, and when I do speak to your clients, there's nothing negative that I say to your clients. I don't ask them for sales numbers or who they're going to. And I always say, I'm working with company XYZ. They're applying for our federal program to become more globally competitive. So we put a very positive spin on that. So that is how we prove foreign competition. I don't know if you want to ask for any questions at this point, Carol?
Currently, we don't have anything up on the screen. So
okay.
Please feel free to ask at any time though, folks.
Okay. So the next step is we're going to go through the actual process of our program, and I'll go through the 4 steps that we have to do. So the first step is pre-qualification. And what we do at this point is just to see if you even qualify. So what we do is after, if you're interested, I'll send you this form, and it may look difficult, but I've had companies send this back to me in less than 15 minutes. And really what it is it's an Excel spreadsheet. And what we look at is we look at your total net sales. And then if you have export sales over 5%, you'll see the next column over. We ask that you subtract those, export sales. Resale is for a lot of times if you're working with like distributors and all that, that's where resale is. Most of our manufacturers never deal with resale. And then we also take away intercompany transactions if you are a larger company with multiple locations and multiple companies. But most of the companies that we deal with are what I call my vanilla companies. And really they're just looking at net sales and they're looking at their employment. And those are the 2 different parameters that we need the 5% losses on. So how we start it, and if you're looking at this form here, if you look at the bottom 2 tables here, we start with everything current year to date. So that's how we measure your losses. So we don't look at your fiscal year, we don't look at your calendar year or the calendar year January to December. We look at everything current year to date. So for example, in this case, you see that, we're in July now. So we're looking at July 2019 to June 2020. And then we look at that same time frame the year before. And we're trying to determine, if you look at the bottom left hand of the screen, it's sort of cut off so you can't see it. But we're trying to see losses for the domestic sales and employment. And this sheet automatically calculates everything. Now, I'm not going to go into super detail or spend a lot of time on this worksheet. The only thing I want you to realize is that we have many ways to qualify you. We start current year to previous year. If your numbers don't show those 5% losses in both categories, then we can do a 24-month look back, which is the upper right-hand table, or a 36-month look back, which is the upper left-hand table. And what that means is that you may be flat or maybe even increasing from last year, but if you look at maybe back 2 years or 3 years or back to July 2016 of that year, you may be able to show some losses that way. We also can do interim look backs. And what that means is I can take a small snapshot current year to date, for example, December 2019 to June 2020, and look at those numbers versus that same time frame the year before. So sometimes if we narrow down that time frame, you may actually be able to qualify, because one bad month can throw you over the edge. I don't know if anybody has any questions on this so far.
We do, Teresa. We do have one question. Actually, we have 2 questions. The first one was, can you use the program multiple times? If you've used it in the past, can you participate again?
So technically, our program is meant to be a one and done. I know you guys have the MAP one with NYSEG and RG&E, those, which are great. You can go to the well multiple times. Ours is meant to be done once, but with that being said, we have a $150,000 cap, and I'll get into the logistics and the meat of the grant in a few more slides. But if you go up to 150,000, if you spent all that, then you are no longer eligible. If you've only spent a portion of the up to 150,000, then they can come back until they hit that 150,000 threshold.
Great. And if Laura, if you had a follow-on question to that, that would be great. Otherwise, hopefully that answered your question. Also, there was a question on how long does it take to get pre-qualified?
Oh, no, the pre-qualification process literally takes minutes in the aspect, once you send this form back to me as you see it, once you send it back to me completed, as soon as I look at it, because it automatically calculates it all, I will immediately turn around and send you the information to start the qualification process, to do the petition. So the pre-qualification is really in your hands. It's as long as it takes you to fill out that form to get it to me.
Thanks, Teresa.
Is that it right now?
That's it for now.
Okay. So the next step. This is after you filled out that worksheet, and we do see that you qualify, where we determined that you have 5% losses in a certain time frame. Then what happens is now I'm going to need documentation for this. So what we look at very simply is, this is not a difficult process. We do need profit and loss statements in the time frame that you qualify. We do need your, whether it's New York State 45 employment record, or if you're from New Jersey, we look at New Jersey 927s, and basically we look at it is just the cover page. We don't want social security numbers, we don't want any identifying employee information, just a cover page that shows how many bodies worked for your company in that quarter, and it gives it monthly. Outside of that, with a couple of the customer contacts and information, we look at what's your company name, what do you produce, what's your DUNS number, what's your NICS code, what's your market. I mean, very simplistic information. So what happens is that one of the nice things about this program is I do all the work for you. Outside of you giving me your data, obviously I can't, get your data, but once you give me your data, I do everything for you. So you don't have to worry about writing a grant, writing a proposal or a petition. It's a very simple process. So what happens is once you send this information to me, I will then put a petition to the Economic Development and Administration in Washington, and they're the ones that actually will approve your petition. Our approval rate is extremely high because we vet you out very well prior to sending in the petition. So if you have those losses and hit those parameters, you should qualify for this grant, this funding program. There's no cost to apply, and this is all business confidential. I know people are very concerned about confidentiality. This is exempt from foiling or anything of that nature. It's all confidential. Now, I'm going to extol the virtues of this grant. There are many positive things, but I will also tell you some of the, I don't want to say negatives, but some of the things that may be frustrating. And it's the last statement here. It's typically 90 to 120 days for this step. Unfortunately, lately, this has been longer. So one of the things that I do tell any of the people who are looking to apply for this program is you cannot count on when the funding, will be available, because I don't know exactly how long the EDA will take to review your petition. And the reason being is the EDA in our department, we have a very small department, and there's 11 of us centers across the country sending in petitions into this queue. So there could be a 1,500-page petition in front of you, there could be 20 petitions in front of you, or there could be one. So we can never say, we say typically 90 to 120 days, but sometimes it's longer. So one of the things that I tell, different companies who are applying is that with this in mind, is that keep in mind that we can't pay for anything retroactively with this program, but we can pay for things moving forward. So you may want to phase a project that you cannot wait for. If you have as we talked the other day, a 911 project, this is not the funding for it, unless you can maybe potentially phase it. So if you do phase 1, 2, and 3, and the funding has not been approved yet for you, we can't pay for anything retroactively, but now funding's been approved, we can pay for the rest of the phases. Or another way to overcome the time frame issue is buy the Kia now and then upgrade bells and whistles and get the Cadillac when the funding comes in. And I don't mean to simplify it too much like that, because I know you can't do that with all projects, but it's just a way to understand, you cannot count on timeliness for the funding. The funding will be there. It's just we can't tell you when. Any questions yet?
We don't have any questions, Teresa.
Okay.
I do have a comment to
Sure.
add to that. Is we've been very successful in putting different grants together in that scenario. So maybe that phase 1 can't be covered under this funding, but we might be able to get that covered under some other funding, or part of that covered under some other funding, whether that's WDI or whether that's the NYSEG National Grid grant. Like, we've been very successful, and I think it's really important to take that long-term kind of big picture approach, because packaging them together can be really powerful. So
yeah, and I'll discuss that as well when I get into the advantages of our program. So I'll definitely address that. So thank you for that. So here's one of the things that could be perceived as something that is a negative sometimes, but I don't look at it that way. But a lot of companies want capital equipment. Now, our funding can only be used for knowledge-based services. So one of the things I'll hear is like, geez, I need a new piece of equipment. I really didn't need these services like management, marketing, finance, IT, any kind of employee training, manufacturing engineering, ISO certifications. But when somebody tells me they need a new piece of equipment, I'll say, well, you may need a new plant layout design, don't you? You may need new certifications because you have better equipment. You may need new marketing to talk about your capabilities. You may need a new ERP software system. And they're like, oh, so it's sort of thinking outside the box a lot of times because most people want capital equipment. So ours is only for knowledge-based services, but once they realize that they need a lot of these ancillary services to go along with a capital equipment purchase, then they realize how valuable this funding can be. So what I'm going to do too is at the end of my presentation, I will show you some of the types of assistance that are included, just so that when Carol shares this seminar with everybody, you can see it. But I won't go through all the details, but it'll be there for you to read through at the end of this presentation. So now I'm going to talk about what is this funding program and what do you get with this. So as I mentioned, it's for any kind of knowledge-based services, but there's two options, and it's completely up to the client what level of funding that you choose. So the first option, you get up to $30,000 of any type of knowledge-based project. You, the firm, would pay 25% of that $30,000 or $7,500. Our center pays 75% of the $30,000 project or $22,500. So if you're doing a project with AM&T or Next Corps or TAAC or any of the MEPs or any vendor that you choose, your vendor will send out two bills, monthly, quarterly, weekly, however you choose to set it up. You pay your share, we will pay our share. So for example, if you decide to do a $30,000 web project and they send it out for $1,000 a month for 30 months, you're going to pay $250. We will pay $750. The other option that you would have, and it's completely up to you which one you choose, is you can go up to $150,000, 0 to 150. Our disbursement goes to 50%, and you would pay 50%. So a $75,000 split between your cost and what the fund would pay.
And what's the duration of those funding sources?
So I'm going to get into the advantages of all of these, but here's some of the things about the cost share or about this funding program. So one of the things about this that's really nice is that you have 5 years to spend this fund, to spend these funds. So sometimes I'll have people, say, geez, I don't have any projects available right now that I want to do, I'll wait. And I tell firms it's probably better not to wait, because the better you do, the worse it is for this funding, because we are a reactive grant. We are not proactive. You've had to have had losses. So if you're doing too well, you may not qualify for this. So once you're approved, you have 5 years to spend this funding. Now, another thing about this too is that, and Carol had mentioned this earlier, is that for your share, and this is why I do work a lot with the MEPs, a lot of the MEPs, because they're more local versus me being federal, they know what's local for different types of funding, and especially like the NYSEG grants, the MEP grants, different types of local funding sources and all that. You can pay for your share with any type of resources that you want. I jokingly say you can rob a bank. We prefer you don't. But one of the nice things about this funding program is that we don't have a lot of stipulations. It's like commingling of funds. I know some of the funding programs out there are very strict about that. We don't care where you get your share. Another huge aspect about this that we're different than probably 99.9% of most other programs out there is that we are disbursement. So what that means is that most of the fundings that you'll ever get are reimbursement. You have to come up with all of the funds and then get reimbursed after hitting milestones, sometimes strict ones, sometimes difficult ones. Ours is not that way. Ours is dispersed right from the get-go. So you as a client never see a dime of the money. It goes directly to your vendor. So whatever vendor that you choose, when they send out those, those invoices, we're going to pay the vendor directly. So with that being said, you also do not have any tax liability with this funding source. So at the end of the day, really, it's like getting 50 to 75% off a knowledge-based service. So a lot of times you may want to upgrade your website, or you may want to upgrade your ERP system, or you want to go for that ISO certification to possibly get new information, or you may need cybersecurity or, you know, training or anything like that. These funds are exactly what that can be used for. Any questions yet, Carol?
Actually, you answered one of them, which was about the capital equipment. So thank you.
Okay.
That is a reoccurring question.
Yeah, it is. That's why I try to, you know, let people know. I'm going to extol all the virtues of this program, but I will tell you some of what are perceived drawbacks. So the next phase is, once you've been approved, there's one more step, and this is called an adjustment proposal. And this is basically a very simple diagnostic review of your company and what is it that you want to do. So once you've been approved, you're going to let us know what types of projects you want to do. We put together this business plan and we submit it back to the EDA for approval. Now, this step typically takes just a few weeks, because it's really a formality to make sure you're spending the money properly. Now, because you have 5 years to spend the money, sometimes your ideas will change or your projects will change. That's okay. That's fine. We've had that question many times. If you start out with, you know, plan A and plan on doing it, but 2 years down the road it changes, that is not a problem. And one thing you'll hear me say about this program is that a lot of funding programs have a lot of strict guidelines and a lot of you know, metrics you have to hit. And one of the things with ours is that it's not free money, because it's your money and my money. It's federal dollars, but in the world of funding, it's easy. It's easy money. There's very few things that are really overly difficult with this program. So this is my favorite, you know, slide, because I really like to extol the virtues and the positive advantages of this program. It is a very, you know, simple process for the applicant. And one of the things that I pride myself on is communication. So if you do have questions, I try to get back to you in a very timely manner. I am happy that when the day comes that I can come back out and visit, whether we're wearing masks or, whatever it takes at that point. I will be happy to come out and sit down with you and wherever you are and work through the paperwork if you feel there's any questions or something that you might need help with. It is disbursement, so you don't have to come up with all of the money up front and then worry about getting reimbursed. It's dispersed. You only have to come up with your share. Because you do not receive any of the funding directly, you have no tax liabilities. Again, the 5 years to spend it. You can use this funding for multiple projects and multiple vendors. So that's always a nice, aspect with this. We are just the funding source, so we don't dictate what source or what vendor you use. Again, a lot of the times we do work with the MEPs because they are there for you as well. So we do have a great relationship with them, and they're there to help you as well. And one of the most important things with this funding is that there's no penalties associated with this funding. And what I mean by that is that if you choose not to spend a dime of the money, or if you choose only to spend a portion of it, you decide to do the 150 and you spend 10, or the 30 and you spend 10, you're not obligated. While we want you to grow your business, we want you to become more globally competitive and increase your sales and employees. If you do not, there's no clawbacks with this funding. So it takes a lot of the pressure off of this funding. And again, as I mentioned, you can utilize other funding for your share. And really, it's at the end of the day, it's like getting a knowledge-based service for 50 to 75% off. Any questions?
We do have one question. So just for clarification, I think you answered it, but on the no penalties associated with the funding. So if the impact of what you thought the project was going to be was not met, there's no issue with that.
No issue. No, we don't ask for anything. No funding back. Nothing like that. Nothing.
Is there any reporting requirement at the end?
So during the process, the vendor usually will answer a couple questions with the invoices. Carol and I had just discussed this. but that's the vendor. It's not the firm. And at the end, like if you work with an MEP, there is some very simple reporting that we do ask. And the only reason what we ask, and it's very simple, it's like sales numbers, is we just want to see that, the return on investment, so that we also, like the MEPs, can show the benefit and the impact of our program. But again, it's very, very simple, and it's not that frequently.
Oh, and we have one more, Teresa. Do you need multiple proposals when you're engaging in with a vendor? Is there a requirement to have multiple?
So because we work through the Research Foundation, and they're the ones that administer, and they're the ones that actually, they write the checks out of Albany, so the vendors get their money fairly quickly. We have to sort of follow their rules, and it used to be a certain amount of spending. So if you have a $20,000 project, we don't need multiple quotes. But when you go over a certain number, and I believe it's 20,000 or more, we do need a couple quotes. But again, our goal is to not choose who you work with. It's completely up to you. We don't dictate that. But sometimes, if it's larger projects, we do need, multiple, like 2 quotes. Is that what the question was about? Yeah, okay.
That's the question.
Yeah, and a lot of times there's a ways around that too, especially if you're providing a very specific service that nobody else can do. So again, there's ways around that.
Great. Yeah, I was curious about that myself. Does it need to be the lowest cost provider?
No, it does not. No.
Specific criteria? Great.
No.
Thanks. That's it for the questions right now.
Okay, so this is some of the things that I had talked to you about earlier, where I'm not going to read through this. It's part of the presentation, but just to give you an idea, because a lot of times people are thinking, again, capital equipment, and it's like, oh, geez, I didn't think about. So this is like management assistance. Believe it or not, succession planning is a very hot one now, because we have a lot of, baby boomers who are looking to retire. So succession planning is a hot one for us right now. Executive recruitment. Marketing is huge, especially website development. An example of, so for example, if you need new brochures or something, which brochures, a lot of people don't use those anymore, but if you do need a brochure, we can pay for the design of the brochure. We just can't pay to have it printed. So really, if you can touch it, our funding really can't be utilized for that, other than prototypes. Prototype is something that is tangible that we can pay for. Finance assistance, from a standpoint, we cannot pay for any employee benefits or salaries, but from a standpoint, if you need, the ERP systems or profitability plans, budgeting and forecasting, if you have to hire somebody to do things like this, our funds can pay for that. IT is another big one. We can't pay for the hardware, but we can pay for the software. For example, we cannot pay for Microsoft Office, like if you go to Staples and buy it off the shelf, but we can pay for those custom manufacturing software programs for manufacturer. And this is one of our hot ones. ERP systems are very hot for our assistants. And again, here's some examples of manufacturing and engineering that you could utilize our funding for. And then also ISO certifications are a big one that people need, because, believe it or not, even though you're trying to combat foreign competition hurting your sales, we support, and I work a lot with the U.S. commercial services with exporting. If your company needs to learn to export more, from what my understanding is, we only touch the tip of the iceberg because it's overwhelming. You can utilize our funds to help you become a better exporter and begin to export more. Which sometimes people think, oh, you could use it for that. And yeah, really any kind of those types of assistances that it can be used for. But in a nutshell, this is a simple program that has been around for 42 years. Most people don't know we exist, and so I rely heavily on groups like AM&T and the MEPs across the states to help me, along with different consultants and different governmental administrations, the chambers and things of that nature, because it's a lot of you manufacturers out there, I always call you my forgotten heroes. The big guys get a lot of money thrown at them, and our small to medium ones, they have to fight for everything they get. They're not in an ivory tower. A lot of times I'm dealing with the owners who are the cook and bottle washer and dishwasher, and I'm very respectful and understanding of your time as well, and we'll do everything that we can to help you. And even if our funding program does not work, I'd like to be able to say I'm a connector. I used to say I like to be Mrs. Claus on Miracle on 34th, but I'm starting to look like her more, so I don't like to use that comparison. But you know, we try to help you because we do work with a lot of different institutions that may be able to help you that you're not aware of. So I'll work hard to do that as well.
A couple questions, and then I'll open it up to ask folks to type in anything in the question and answer as well. So is there a company size requirement, Teresa?
Absolutely not. We can go from technically 0 employees, which I love to give examples. So 0 employees, you'd think, well, how do you have an employee loss? So I worked with a woman who does decorative glass, and she had 0 employees, but we can also look at, and this is why I didn't get into a lot of the details, but we can look at contract employees and temporary employees. So she had 10 contract employees last year and 5 this year. So she qualified, even though it was 0 employees. So we can go from teeny tiny. I mean, we can work with Caterpillar, you know, we can work with Toyota, we can work with any company. Another question I get too is that a lot of times we're finding foreign owned companies. So we can work with any manufacturer that is not a division. We always have to go with headquarters, but if it's a wholly owned subsidiary or affiliate, we can work with them. And there's no size limitations, big or small.
Great. Also, are travel expenses covered under the grant?
For the consultant?
Yes.
I believe they are, but let me get back to you, so that it would be a follow-up question. I believe they are. And you can actually, believe it or not, use consultants outside of the country.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah, you can use consultants outside of the country, because I know the MEPs, you know, they do a lot of the work, but from a lot of the conversations I've had with them, they also realize as you know, that they want the best for, you know, the client and who's going to be able to provide the best, you know, services. And so, you know, sometimes they'll go out of the country. But let me follow up with that to make sure on that.
Great, that's helpful, thank you. And the last question I have is on, are there any match requirements, like in-kind match requirements for the company? Some grants have that, that they compare, they expect you to, your labor cost or like your investment that you make
Nothing.
in the program.
Other than, you know, your share of the, you know, up to 30,000, you know, they have to pay their portion, as we had said, you know, the 25%, if, you know, but that's the, you know, the whole premise of the grant is that they have to pay either 25% up to 30,000 or 50% up to 150,000.
I have another question in the chat box. If headquarters has already used up their 150,000, would a wholly owned subsidiary qualify?
They should, because they're wholly owned. If it's a wholly owned subsidiary, then they should. But again, that's something, let me double check. I haven't been in that position, but let me double check that. As long as they're not a division, then that shouldn't be a problem.
Great, so they could qualify the wholly owned subsidiary.
Yeah, let me double check, but yeah, I believe they can.
And I will make sure that the questioner gets the response to that.
Yes, thank you.
Session. Are there any other questions? Give it a minute. Teresa, you did a great job. It is a great program. You know, we've been, you know, from AM&T's vantage point, we've had a lot of success with the TAAC program and using it in concert with some of the other resources that are available. It's been great. You know, it's really had a big impact on some of the organizations that we've worked with, and as an organization, you're a pleasure to work with. So I appreciate that very much.
As you guys are too, thank you. And I just, like I say, you know, with anything, there's positives and there's negatives. And, you know, I do understand, you know, we all want our money. We all want everything done yesterday. And that is something that is frustrating, you know, with our program, because we don't always know. I can say that I know we're trying to work on that right now. They're actually in a process right now where they're looking at changing some things to make the process a little bit more quickly and more streamlined. And, you know, talking to you the other day, Carol, like you said, your NYSEG grant, they're moving quicker. So we're hoping that there is an understanding that people don't want to wait. We do see some frustrations where companies will easily hit the sales loss, but not the employee loss, because they're, you know, they're working very hard to maintain and keep their employees, because in this world, it's very hard to find them. And so, you know, we try to do everything to include these companies versus exclude them from the program, but once in a while it just doesn't work with the employees. So we'll keep in touch. It is a rolling grant, meaning that there's really no time frame where you have to have it by a certain amount of time from a standpoint, or the funding's gone. The only time frame we do have to follow is your information cannot be more than 120 days old. And if you go past that 120 days because you couldn't get me the information for whatever reason, and again, I understand life and everybody's busy, then we just get the next months of data, you know, so it's not a problem. So we can just keep adding a month of data. The only drawback could be with that is you may disqualify, because the better you do, the worse it is from a standpoint for our grant or our funding program, because you have to have 5% losses. But outside of that, the funding's been around for 42 years. My goal is to run out of the funding. You know, I want to help as many clients as we can.
And that changes in the financials as the time passes, that's prior to it being approved, correct? Like when to
Yeah, they have to, yeah, because you know, if I say you're pre-qualified, this is your time frame. And I mean, for example, I just had a company in Syracuse that they had somebody not hitting, you know, they got on a wrong website and it crashed their whole system. It literally crashed their whole system. So obviously they had a very valid excuse why they couldn't get me, you know, the information. So we just had to, you know, push it out a couple months, and thankfully they still qualified. You know, and I understand it. I understand life. I mean, look at what we're all dealing with now. You know, I mean, whoever would have thought, you know, with COVID. And that's something else I'd like to address real quick, is that we're not meant for COVID. So, you know, there's different programs for COVID and things of that nature. But because of COVID, there has been some losses. So as long as you can show 5% due to foreign competition of your losses and employees, you'll qualify. 95% of it may be COVID issues, but as long as our 5%, as long as we can say 5% is due to foreign competition, then they can qualify. Where they may not have qualified prior to COVID because they were doing so well, but they did have foreign competition. They just couldn't hit the numbers, but now maybe they can. So same thing with tariffs. I get that a lot. You know, are you there for tariffs? Again, it's not a direct, our program is not directly for impact of tariffs, but if you've been negatively impacted by tariffs and you're losing sales and employees due to higher tariffs or things like of that nature, and your clients now go to a foreign company because they can't afford your prices because of the tariffs, or the same thing with COVID. If you didn't get in product, or if you didn't get, you know, your prices are higher because of COVID, and your client leaves, you know, the country, goes to Canada, Mexico, wherever, Canada is a foreign country, then you can qualify. So indirectly, you know, the answer is yes. Directly, technically, we're not meant for COVID or tariff issues, but ultimately we indirectly can help them.
It sounds like a great opportunity to evaluate whether this funding sources would be appropriate for your organization based on that. Like now would be a good time to do the investigative work.
And another thing too is that with all this COVID issues, I mean, they're going to have to look at, like, you know, plant layout designs or safety issues or things of that, which is all what our funds cover. So again, you know, it helps them, you know, it's helping them become competitive, you know, ultimately globally, to as long as they're doing well. So, you know, that's our hope, is that, you know, ultimately this funding can be used for a lot of things that are especially pertinent and relevant today.
Tressa, thank you so much. And Jeff, thank you so much. It was so informative. And we have a couple thank yous in the question and answer section.
Thank you to both for having me. I appreciate it. And thank you all for, you know, coming on today. And if you could pass the word out, and please feel free. My information is right there. I should have put my cell phone out, so I'll ask Carol at the end of this, if you do share this, please, you know, put my cell phone on there and my email. I'm very, you know, very responsive, as they know. That's something that I pride myself on, that you will be able to speak to me within a very reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, what we will do is we'll send out a link after the session with to the recorded webinar, and I'll make an update and include your cell phone in the information. Also, there'll be a link on our website at amt-mep.org. So again, I'd like to thank everyone for coming today, and be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.